Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another amazing topic of conversation. Thank you to my sponsors, the Health Channel. For everything regarding your health, please sign up to their newsletter. And if you need working spaces, if it's virtual or even if it's a space for an hour, Alexa's Workspaces. So thank you. Sharifa, it is a pleasure having you here today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're both in the event business.
Mhm.
We were talking offline and we shared some of the things that we do to overcome the stress and how to take events very calmly.
Mhm.
So each one takes it, each one does it very completely different.
Yes.
But we came to the conclusion that if anybody wants to be in the event business, definitely this is not a 9 to 5.
No, not at all. It is so much more involved. And I think it's a good thing that it's really busy and you work a lot of hours in your busy season, but then there's also an off season where you can kind of recuperate those hours, where you can do a little bit of planning for the future. And I appreciate that division where you're really busy, it's all out for periods of time, and then sometimes you have like a little bit of a slower season where you can like reorient yourself and get ready for the year ahead.
Sometimes the season continues.
Sometimes the season continues all the way through, but sometimes it does slow down just a bit, especially like after Christmas. That's my favorite part. That's my favorite transition in events.
Really?
Yeah,
Why
like
it
so
slows
Christmas,
down?
it's like crazy. You're delivering all these events, and then there's like in January, it just gets a little bit slower. And I like that kind of getting a chance to reset.
On the contrary, welcome to Miami.
Yeah, it just gets busier and
January,
busier.
no. January is one of the highest months in the season.
Ah, I see. That's very interesting. I guess coming from Canada and then working in the UK, where you have that winter season, like once it's cold, everyone spent all their money at Christmas. Then in January, it's a little bit quieter.
No, no. Here, the winter season is the high season for events.
Ah, I
So be
see.
prepared for it. Low season is more or less is June, July, August,
In
the
the
summer
summer.
season. So it's very different from other countries.
I see. Very interesting to learn about. And that's something that I'm excited about moving to Miami and now teaching in events, like learning about the different elements, the different cultural aspects that then I have to share with my students. So one of them is kind of like peaks and valleys in the events industry. So this is a good learning for me.
Correct. So tell us a little bit about your story before coming here.
Mhm. So I'm originally from Canada. And what introduced me to the events world is really like my mom and my family. So they used to run a variety of different cultural events when I was growing up. So I was kind of just thrown into the mix at an early age, being responsible for serving or being responsible for taking tickets. I was just always around the events industry in some way, or even performing. Like back in the day, I used to play the saxophone and the piano. So sometimes I'd get called in to do like musical acts for different events related to culture. I also played soccer relatively competitively. So I received a soccer scholarship to Syracuse University, which is a D1 school. And I played soccer there. And kind of in the middle of maybe my sophomore year, I just had my second knee surgery and I realized that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. And I started to think about, okay, I need to think about my career moving forward. What am I going to do? And the only thing that was even remotely appealing to me was working in sport. So I was a sport management major at the time, but there was this like idea of working for the Olympics. I want to work for the Olympics. The Olympics would be such a cool opportunity to take on. And I remember asking, some of the people around me, how do I work for the Olympics? And they weren't 100% sure what that pathway looked like either. So after university, I took some time to travel. I worked on a cruise ship, which was amazing, and I had an opportunity to go all throughout the Caribbean, parts of Europe, Asia, Australia. I also worked in Spain. I taught English in Spain. So while I was traveling, I was just looking at different elements of the events industry and the sports industry, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I moved back home to Toronto, decided that I'm going to get serious on what that next step in my career looked like. And that's when I really started to drill down into this idea of sport and events. So my first major sporting event was an event called the Pan Am Games, and it was hosted in Toronto. And I was able to get a job there and network with all these industry professionals that worked on the next Olympic Games, the next Commonwealth Games, stakeholders, sponsors for the next big events in the world. And I thought, how cool, I want to do this forever. And I finally had an opportunity to touch, see that dream, how it can be executed to work on the Olympics. So I spent the next 5+ years kind of traveling and working in different spaces all over the world. So I spent a couple of years in Australia, then I transitioned to the UK. And while I was working in the UK, I started, I worked at Tower Bridge, which is probably one of London's most iconic landmarks, delivering hospitality, catering, and events for Tower Bridge. And that was where I really got a strong understanding of how to deliver corporate events. I was dealing with clients like Adidas, TED Talk, English Football League, and it was a fantastic experience, just kind of getting thrown into the mix and delivering really high quality events for high profile clients. I then kind of experienced what everyone experiences during the pandemic, where sport and events came to a screeching halt, and I had to determine what did I do next. So luckily for me, I had received my master's in education because I've always wanted to teach. It's something that I'm really quite passionate about. So I then pivoted during the COVID, and I started teaching professional development classes online, specifically for the events industry. So people that either worked in events and wanted to upskill in a different area of the events world, or they wanted to get into events, but they didn't know how to do so. From there, I then transitioned into lecturing at a university, so a small university just in Southwest London called St. Mary's University. And I was working as a sport management lecturer there. And then kind of just to wrap up the story, I then was offered a really great opportunity to work on the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. So I moved to Qatar to work on the FIFA World Cup, and I was there for about a year and a half before I made my transition to Miami to work at FIU as a teaching professor and program lead for the mega events, event and entertainment programs.
So Qatar.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup can be the number 2 after the Olympics.
Yes. Well, I think it's technically number 1. When you think about 3 billion people, 3 out of 8 billion people.
3 billion people
watch the World Cup. It's, I think, the biggest sporting event out there. The Summer Olympics and the FIFA World Cup are the 2 biggest events. But I personally, especially being a soccer fan, huge soccer fan from an early age, I always feels like the World Cup is one of the biggest ones for me. But the Olympics incorporates the most athletes from all over the world.
So who hired you? Who did you work for?
So I worked for the Qatari government, an entity called the Supreme Committee. Now, the Supreme Committee was the organization that was awarded the bid in 2012, I believe, when the bid came through. Somewhere along the line, the Supreme Committee and the local organizing committee, they broke apart, or there was a Supreme Committee and then the local organizing committee, they broke apart. So the local organizing committee, they were responsible for delivering all the services related to the stadium, related to soccer inside the event. And the Supreme Committee, and this is just to simplify the process, they became responsible for everything outside of the soccer stadiums themselves.
Like hotels, transportation.
Correct. Hotels,
Those
transportation,
logistics.
wayfinding, anything outside of the stadiums was the responsibility of the Supreme Committee.
How was it? How was your experience working in Qatar?
I loved it. I thought that it was a fantastic experience. Before moving to Qatar, I'd never traveled to the Middle East. I'd never stepped foot in the Middle East at all. So I wasn't sure what to expect. I watched a couple videos about Qatar going in, but really had no idea what it was going to look like, what the culture consisted of. But I absolutely loved it. The people are really hospitable. The climate is perfect for me. I love really, really warm climate. Sometimes it got a bit too warm. It's extremely hot during the summer, but there's a lot to see across the Middle East. And yeah, for a new experience, I thought it was great.
Qatar is one of the Arab countries.
Correct.
And I know that the Arab country culturally goes against, like not goes against, but are very chauvinistic.
Mm.
So working for an Arab country as a woman and as a woman of color, was it difficult?
You know, it's interesting. I didn't feel like my color played a big role, like my skin color played a big role in the way that I was treated. It is a patriarchal society. It is male dominated, male run society. But I have to say that in my department, so I first of all started off in workforce, and then I transitioned into a department called Last Mile. And Last Mile is essentially the space between the closest transport hub. So transport hub can be the metro, for example. It could be a bus station. It could be a taxi drop-off area. It could be parking, and then the site itself. So in most cases, it's the stadium. But in my case, it was the FIFA Fan Festival, which is the only FIFA-sponsored festival in Qatar. So I was responsible for managing that space. So workforce was predominantly dominated by women, and the department that I was working with was predominantly international. And then when I transitioned to Last Mile, I was working with a lot of Qataris and a lot of Russians, because Russia was the last World Cup, hosted the last World Cup. So you typically take professionals that have the experience from the previous World Cup and use them to help implement your objectives for the current World Cup or the current event. So while I was actually working there, I had really great relationships with a lot of my male colleagues. I do have to say that maybe in the beginning, before they knew me, I was maybe invisible, like they wouldn't really go out of their way to interact with me. But then as I went along and I kind of proved myself, and I was able to prove myself by being extremely knowledgeable on every aspect of my job, then I was able to develop really strong relationships with my colleagues. But I would say for the most part, everyone was extremely respectful of me, being a woman, respectful of my opinion, wouldn't like cut me off and not let me speak. None of those issues. I would say that I actually experienced more issues related to gender dynamics in the West than I did in Qatar, in that department, in that space. Now, with that said, most of my bosses were male. Most of the bosses at senior level were male, but that's not very different than, some Western cultures. So I think not everyone had the same experience that I had. I had some colleagues that had challenges working with their male colleagues, but everyone that I worked with, they were fantastic.
Tell us one wow story.
Yeah, one wow story.
During the Qatar World Soccer game.
Yeah. Well, I can tell one related to, I guess, gender dynamics, and then I can tell one just in general. So we, as Last Mile team, we had put together some proposals of how we were going to help manage the crowd as they were ingressing into the FIFA Fan Festival and then how they were leaving. So we had many discussions, and even before I joined the team, there was many discussions as to how this was going to unfold. One of the last kind of, I guess, approvals that we needed was from like a council. So my boss had said to me, we have to go to this council meeting. It was like 4 o'clock, and we just found out that we had to be there for like 5 o'clock. So we rushed, we went to the council meeting, and then I walked into one of the most secure buildings in Qatar. It was really, really interesting. Like, it's super modern, super sleek. The security is like extremely high level. And we walk into this room, and it felt like I was walking into like a very official meeting, like like a meeting of like, you know, only very senior leadership. And there was all of these men around a circle table. They were all wearing their white thobes, and they were speaking completely in Arabic. And I was the only woman for like miles. I didn't see one woman in that building. So I went into the meeting, and I was preparing myself to like present this information. Luckily, it turns out that I didn't have to present any of the information. And I think my boss was asked one question, which he was then able to answer. It was just in the event that I had to present, thinking about presenting in front of this like all male, must have been like 20 males, all wearing their thobes, all speaking Arabic, and only like 3 words of English were spoken the whole time. So that was one of those like, whoa moments, something that I'd never experienced before. But like I said, I knew some of the people in the room. When they saw me, they kind of nodded, but it was obviously a meeting that I was just there to support, not just to answer questions. But yeah, that I wasn't going to be an integral part of that meeting. And then one of the like wow moments, I would have to say, was probably the first, one of the first days of the FIFA Fan Fest opening. And just the number of fans that were making their way to the FIFA Fan Festival to take part in the opening acts. So Maluma was there, and then we had like other really notable artists, but there was people from all over the world. And I've been to major sporting events before, but nothing like this. Like, we're talking about Canadians and Mexicans and people from literally England, all over the globe were there to celebrate the World Cup. And it gives me goosebumps thinking about it, like interacting with these guests, with these clients or these spectators that are coming in to participate in the event itself, and seeing how happy and enthusiastic they are to take part in the culture. So I think that was really special for me. That was like a really wow moment, that the world really comes out for this event. And then another really wow moment for me was Canada scoring their first World Cup goal. I was there for it, and at Khalifa Stadium, and it was really special getting to be a part of history in the making.
Let's go back to the oops. Something that you had to pivot, something that had like a horror story.
Yes.
We all know there's behind the scenes.
Yes. So one of the interesting things about the Middle East is that things can change like that. Like in events, they can just in general, but like, you know, leading up into one of the last days, we still weren't sure whether or not there was going to be a National Day parade in line with the last match of the tournament. So the last match of the tournament fell on a holiday called National Day. And National Day is like a crazy holiday in Qatar. People drive their vehicles down into the city center. They're like honking their horns. They're celebrating Qatar, celebrating the nation. So think about it like Independence Day, but just with, yeah, it's just like exactly like Independence Day, just people get kind of crazy. So that day coincided with the last match of the tournament, so France versus Argentina, and everybody comes out for National Day. So whatever traffic we would traditionally have for National Day, plus the traffic that's associated with the
The
last match
final,
with the
final
finals.
match.
So we had thousands, tens of thousands, and I'm confident hundreds of thousands of people making their way not only to Lusail, which is where the last match was being held, but also into the city center, to the FIFA Fan Festival, to the Corniche, to watch the matches. So my job as part of as being a crowd manager is to essentially ensure that there's no major crowd management issues. Now, everything that we do in Last Mile is preventative. So we are collaborating with stakeholders to ensure that the right people are in place, the right infrastructure is in place for safety reasons. We are putting up signage so that people know that, for example, this area is full to go to another area. We are working with security that if crowd management gets out of control, if it's a crowd control issue, then security then steps up and has our back. So there's a lot of pre-work that goes into crowd management. We're putting up barriers, or having additional barriers around to help to reinforce traffic in a different direction. But if you have hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people all coming to one area at one time, you lose control of the crowd really quite easily. So one of the areas that I was responsible for managing was the FIFA Fan Festival, which had a capacity of 40,000 people. Now, we had a contingency plan that once the FIFA Fan Festival was at 50%, we would then start redirecting people to another area which was really close by, which was called the Corniche Activation, which was 7 kilometers of activation space. But on the last match, everybody just wants to watch the match. And we felt that there wasn't enough screens for everyone to watch the match. So at 50% capacity, even before that, because we knew the volume of people that were coming, we were starting to redirect people to the Corniche. However, people are not listening to you anymore. They're just focused on their goal, which is to get to the FIFA Fan Festival. So my staff were trying to do everything. Staff on the ground, we would have marshals, supervisors, then we have area leads, which would be the next level, and then we have our site leads. And it was all hands on deck, trying to redirect people to different areas, but it was like people were not hearing us. So it was a combination of my team, Last Mile, struggling with security and police to ensure that there was no major crowd management issues. And like a major crowd control issue could be death. You know, that's what happens when you have too many people in one space.
Okay.
So we're trying to redirect people. And then all of a sudden, there's issues with the transport, and transport shuts down for a number of hours. So one of the techniques that you have to get people out of the area is to send them to the metro for them to then be able to depart, but then the metro shut down. So not only did we have no way of really redirecting people, we were not also able to use the metro to really get people outside of the city. So that was another issue. And yeah, it was a really tough, I'd say 4 hours, trying to just prevent as much as we could, people getting crushed, people overcrowding areas, and people still having an enjoyable time with the limitations that we had. So that was one of those, oh my God, what do we do moments? And I was in the FIFA Fan Festival emergency control room trying to coordinate this with all of my different teams. So it was, yeah, a night to be remembered, that is for sure.
But nothing happened, nothing major happened.
Nothing major happened. I mean, it was really scary for periods of time. One of my colleagues called me and she was crying because what she was seeing was so overwhelming. There was people that were like jumping the barriers that we had set up to try and prevent these crowd crushing issues, with children. So they were making really irrational decisions, like jumping barriers and moving into really closed, tight corners with children when anything could happen. People were losing shoes, trying to make their way into FIFA Fan Festival, and it was like a bit of a struggle. And really, there's nothing that we can do once our crowd management techniques kind of dissipate. All we can do is try and plan for the future, the crowds that are still coming, but the people that are in the moment right now, right there and then, there's not much that we can do. So security was struggling with them, police were struggling with them. And then I think once we hit the 40,000 capacity limit, then this FIFA Fan Festival, at least they secured the perimeter, and then it was just about redirecting people from there to the limited options we had available. So yes, no major crowd management issues. No one's died, but it was really scary at times, and it did take a toll on our staff members.
But that was also towards the end. So
Yeah, that was the final day.
Okay.
It was absolute chaos.
And then everybody leaving.
Yeah, everyone leaving was a real challenge as well, because the metros just started to get up and running. So if you think about Qatar, is like there's like a straight line. At the end of the line is where the match was being held, Lusail Stadium, and then we were in the center of the line, and then obviously the other end of the line. So there were people that had gone to Lusail not only for the final match, but also for the National Day Parade. They were then trying to make their way across the line to then head to wherever their location was. And most people took the metro because the city center was like closed off at that period of time. So at the end of the day, we were sometimes only able to get 12 people per minute onto the metro. So if you can imagine the queues, 40,000 people, maybe more, like considerably more than 40,000 people, 60,000, 80,000, 100,000 people in the city center trying to get home. And we're only able to, at one metro station, able to allow 12 people per minute onto the metro. We had severe crowding, and it took, I think, 4 or 5 hours once the match finished to actually clear most people from the city center. So that was, yeah, my team kind of coordinating that process. It was full on until the end of the night.
I can't imagine the next day.
Yeah, the next day everyone was exhausted. Yeah, absolutely exhausted. I can't remember. I think we had the next day off. We gave everyone the next day off, and then we came back the following day to kind of close up shop.
Yeah, because people forget that once an event passes, you really need to close the event.
Yes. Yeah, so there was a lot of temporary overlay, like marquees, that needed to be closed down. All of our staff needed to write reports and kind of provide best practices for the future. We had to talk about how our operation evolved, because in the planning stage, we had certain ideas as to what the crowd flow would look like, and then based on actual delivery, we had to modify our operation consistently throughout the operation in order to make it as safe as possible. So there was a lot of adjustments, a lot of additional crowd control barrier, a lot of repositioning staff, reallocating staff based on, spaces that were highly concentrated with people and spaces that we thought were going to be highly concentrated with people that then weren't. So there was a lot of kind of reorganizing our operational plan to show how our plan was actually executed.
So with that information now, you take it and advise the next World Cup?
Repeat, please.
With that information and everything that you learned from a World Cup, you take it on to the next organizers of the next one?
Yeah, so I mean, you learn from your experience. There's no better experience than actually delivering an event. So my colleagues that worked on the previous World Cup, I'll start to see them kind of moving over to the current World Cup, which is in 2026, and the headquarters being in Miami, which is very exciting. So especially with this joint bid, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, it will then be an opportunity for my colleagues with that experience to not only consult, but hopefully be able to work on delivering the World Cup as well. Because there's nuances to every World Cup. So if you work at World Cup in Qatar, it could be an extremely different World Cup than the World Cup in the United States or in Canada or in Mexico, because the demographics are so different.
The culture.
Mm-hmm. Culture is so different.
Will you be involved?
I don't know. Right now I'm working for FIU and I'm really enjoying my role as a teaching professor. I do like to take some time away from industry every few years and share what I know with my students, help create future events professionals. So right now I have no intention on leaving. I'm really enjoying my job, my role, but who knows what the future holds.
So Sharifa, thank you so much. This was really enlightening, and hopefully we can learn many, many more things. I think this industry evolves every day, like you said,
Yeah,
based on experience.
absolutely. It evolves every day. Thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing to have an opportunity to meet with you and learn about your stories. Yeah, I'm humbled to be here with you.
Thank you. And to everyone, until next week, and above all, stay safe. Have an amazing day.